Welcome to Bearing Weight, a space for the stories elephants can't tell, shared by the people who know them best. Hosted by the Weeping Elephant Project. Welcome back to Bearing Weight. My name is Danielle Carnahan, and I am the Executive Director of Weeping Elephant Project. I am joined by my co-host, David Ebert, who is the founder of Weeping Elephant Project. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different from our usual format. We are getting into the World Circus news that came out a few weeks ago that they are ending elephant shows in their circuses. We are joined by Debbie Metzler from PETA. Debbie is the Managing Director of Captive Wildlife for PETA's Captive Animal Law Enforcement Division. In that role, she oversees campaigns and legal advocacy around captive wild animals in circuses, roadside zoos, and other traveling attractions. Basically, anywhere wild animals are being used for entertainment. She's been with PETA for about 11 years, and PETA itself has been campaigning against World Circus and its use of animals for more than 3 decades. So when it comes to the history behind this news, and what it actually means for the elephants involved, there are very few people better positioned to walk us through it. Debbie's going to answer our questions, give us an update on what they're hearing from World Circus, what's going to happen to the elephants that have been touring so far this year, and how long she thinks this hiatus from elephant shows is going to last. So without further ado, let's get into it. To start off, I'd love for you to tell us what your role has been with the campaign and just kind of introduce the circus campaign a bit.
PETA has actually campaigned against World Circus and its use of animals for over 30 years. So I've been part of the team for about 11 years. So I, came in more recently and after a lot of progress had already been made. It's already been 10 years since Ringling stopped using elephants. So,
It's
um,
amazing.
yeah, when that was right shortly after I started, Ringling stopped using elephants. And so our attention really up to that point had primarily been on Ringling. Obviously, we campaigned against the other circuses as well, but Ringling was the largest one, the most well-known, and our hope, of course, was that the dominoes would fall after Ringling stopped using animals, and to some extent, that is the case. It's just been a bit slower than I think many of us anticipated, and so we've had to really ramp up efforts for these smaller circuses to just knock out the last few that remain. And obviously, just like Ringling, we're okay if the circuses continue and just don't use elephants
Yeah.
and other animals. So that's the issue is the animal acts. And we push that message with venues all the time. We're like, have them bring their human acrobats, their motorcycle acts. I've been to a few circuses and the kids are always so riled up and excited about the motorcycles,
Right.
about, the daredevil kind of acts.
Yeah, those are so fun.
Yeah, that's what they're into, and the animals come out, and they run around in circles, and nobody's impressed. So to us, it's kind of, these circuses are hanging on to something that they see as nostalgic and traditional, but obviously that's never an excuse for cruelty, and they know better now. And so we're just constantly pushing that message. But with regard to this campaign in particular, my role has been to kind of oversee the campaign, on a whole, but primarily focused on the legal side is what my department focuses on. You know, a hallmark, I think, of what PETA is known for is that we are determined to prevail. And because of that, we don't back down. And I think that people know that. And so we just keep the pressure on until we win.
Yeah,
Good for you guys. Really.
it's
You've done
incredible.
you've done some great stuff, including this and Ringling, and it's quite impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking at the history and how far we've come, it really actually is really amazing to see the impact that PETA has had, but also other advocates who have been inspired by PETA's work. And, and I do think that it's a huge group effort and multiple people have been involved and multiple organizations as well. And it really does take that kind of coming from every angle to make the progress that we've made.
Yeah. What was it about Jordan World that brought you guys to focus on them? Was it just that they were another circus that had elephants and you were focusing on any circus with elephants? Or did you feel like they were particularly bad or doing, particularly egregious things with the animals? Or was it just, another circus on the list to knock off?
So Jordan World is one of the last circuses that was using elephants, and at the beginning of every year, we kind of look at the landscape and we say who's being used where. We know these individual elephants, we know their histories, we know all about them. And so we look at who's being used where. We have this been able to keep track of it over the years. And at the beginning of this year, Viola was the elephant who was being used most consistently for the last several years, most frequently, and just, exploited and abused the most of who was left on the road. Viola was the one that was suffering the greatest and needed our attention the most. And so that's why we shifted to really putting pressure and literally tracking Jordan World at every single stop, protesting outside and keeping that pressure on.
Were you able to determine which particular elephants were going to be used for which performances?
So the way that these kind of larger producers, so like the Curtin Circus and the Jordan World Circus, those are the bigger producers right now. Now that Ringling is not using animals, Universal Circus is not using animals. Those two are kind of the bigger producers. And so once they create a contract with an outside exhibitor, if they use an outside exhibitor, which Curtin Circus is its own exhibitor, so a lot of times they just use their own animals. But Jordan World doesn't have a license anymore, so they have to contract out, and once they have those contracts, it's essentially the rest of the season is gonna be that way, and that's been the pattern for a really long time, so we can predict as soon as someone's on the road, we know that that's very likely who will be used.
Right.
However, the one thing we can always guarantee about circuses is that they cannot be predicted.
Yeah.
So, we can do our, most educated guess possible, but they are very unpredictable.
Do you think that's intentional?
Probably, there's
Yeah.
probably a lot of factors that come into play. There could be some extraneous circumstances that come up, where they have to shift around the lineup, but I'm sure that they like to keep things under wraps as much as they can so that we're not there predicting,
Yes.
so that, maybe we look foolish if we have the wrong information or something like that. So I'm sure that there's some intention behind it. But, with the elephants, who've been used by Jordan World Circus the last few years, Jordan World typically has, they start their tour in January, and then they go until the end of May. Then they take a summer break, and then they come back in September, and they go until the end of the year, or at least the end of November. In the last few years, the pattern has been that they used Viola and Isa to start, and then for whatever reason, after the break, they brought Viola and Kelly out, and we don't really know why that happened. There's really anyone's guess. But for that reason, that's why we really zeroed in on Viola because she's the one that just was consistently being used, where sometimes they were switching out the second elephant who was with her.
But it's 2 elephants that they use for performances, and my impression was that there were, 5, 6. I guess maybe that's how I remember Ringling when I was
Yeah,
1,000
so
years ago.
Ringling definitely had more. Well, they had, like, 3 different units, and each one had a different group of elephants, but so over the years, that definitely has changed. Jordan World has in the past, they've used 2 or 3. Probably years ago, even before I started, they might have had 5 or 6. That was much more common to have the larger groups, and there's shrine circuses, so Jordan
Yes.
World does produce several shrine circuses. And sometimes the shrine circuses, which are, really tied to this outdated and archaic tradition, sometimes they specifically will request larger groups. So there's times where they actually bring out more. Viola and Isa might have been the core 2 who are on the main tour, but then for a shrine circus, they might bring 3 others out, and so then they have a group of 5.
So you guys had done a campaign or you'd published some articles and some pieces and you called Viola the most desperate elephant in the world. And was that in response to her escape in Montana in 2024? How did that escape and the content that came with it. I mean, I just imagining that viral video of her walking down the street in Butte. How
Mhm.
did that impact your campaign, and did that improve the trajectory of the campaign because it got in front of more people? How did that really, like, shape things for you guys?
It did that was, part of the inspiration. The fact that, when we were talking as a group and meeting with the other departments about, we wanted to focus on Viola, so then we discuss her story. Um, the folks in my department have done all this research, and we were able to say she was taken from her home when she was a baby over 5 decades ago. She's been with the Carson and Barnes Circus since at least 1974. And she is actually there's a story from 1975 where she actually escaped briefly when she was a baby. And then, the USDA has cited Carson and Barnes Circus nearly 150 times. Some of those citations have been regarding Viola escaping. And so the kind of the common theme here was, wow, she's escaped the circus at least at this point at least 4 times. And to us, that stands out. That's pretty significant that one single elephant has made this attempt so many times, which is both very heartbreaking because it means she's just really desperate to get away, but it also has some promise to it in the sense that she's not totally broken. She still
Yeah.
has hope, and I think that that's something to cling on to and to look at it in a way that we can still her get out of the circus, and that's what our goal is.
Yeah. I mean, you think about yourself in that situation and the, human equivalent of escaping those captors so many times, and it really hits home with how desperate she must be, and just to get away from the shows, away from the noise and the transportation, and it must be such a relief in those moments where she walks away and she's not chained and she's not dealing with people yelling at her, people taking photos.
And PETA did an investigation in the late 90s of Carson Barnes Circus, and we've released that video, and I think it's pretty well known in the community. A lot of people have seen the video of the trainer Tim Frisco beating elephants and screaming at them and instructing other trainers to
Yes.
jab them until the elephants
Scream.
scream in pain. In that video, actually, there is a clip of Viola swaying while she's chained up. There's suffering that she's been enduring for the whole time she's been in the circus, which is at this point over 50 years.
So what's next for her?
Well, unfortunately, she actually still is with Carson and
Right.
Barnes. And so even though she's not on the road, which obviously is the most egregious way that these animals are being exploited and abused, because every single elephant who's currently in a US circus is elderly. They're all geriatric. They are all suffering from various different ailments. And imagine, as like forcing your grandmother to go out and work every single night and do difficult things that cause her pain. That's the situation that these arthritic and elderly elephants are in. And so uh, I think that's one reason we're seeing them come off the road more, because even the circus exhibitors themselves recognize that the writing's on the wall, and these elephants can only take so much more.
The writing's on the wall in terms of an inability eventually to use these elephants to perform?
I think I think that, just their literal physical inability, but also in knowing that there's been a shift. There's been a paradigm shift. There's been, so much awareness and people who've taken a stance against using elephants especially, but all animals in the circus. That there's no market for them to really, like, continue to breed elephants for the
Right.
circus and to
Right.
continue this cycle, and so they're just using the elephants they currently have out there until they can't do it anymore, and so getting these elderly elephants off the road is definitely the priority. But Carson and Barnes has 17 elephants in all, and they are kept at their facility called the Endangered Ark Foundation in Oklahoma. And at that facility, they do public encounters, they do photo ops, and they're still obviously using bullhooks to train these elephants, which are sharp weapons, kind of like a fireplace poker. And then they will lease them out to circuses, for the right price. So even though Viola's not currently on the road, that does not mean they won't lease her out at some point to like maybe a shrine circus or something.
Why do you think that Jordan made this decision?
Well, I think a big part of it was PETA's
I
protests.
think so.
We were outside their every single one of their shows, and they knew that, again, we were determined to prevail, so we were going to be at every single one. I think maybe one thing that might have even caught them off guard is that we were protesting outside of circuses where the elephants weren't even allowed to be, but we were still there to get the message out and to discourage people from going because it's not they weren't using elephants in Washington by choice. They were literally not allowed to because
Right.
of the new law. And so we weren't going to give them any sort of leeway, and we are not going to let up. And so we were still there even
That's
with the elephant
interesting.
inflatable, and we were prepared. People would be like, "Oh, I didn't know there were elephants here." And we actually would tell them, "Well, they're actually not because they're not allowed in Washington, but this circus is using them every chance they can and don't support them for this like." And we had so many people actually who had no idea that elephants were even still being used in the circus. There's a lot of people who thought as soon as Ringling stopped using elephants, that meant there were no elephants left in the circus. And I mean, unfortunately, that's not the case. But that tells you both the impact that I think Ringling had and why it was so important to really put so much pressure on them for so long, because that's where people really looked to think of what the circus is like. But it also gets to this point that they're not even showing up at these circuses to see elephants. They're coming for the
That's
other acts.
huge. It's
They're coming
huge.
for the acrobatics, the dazzling,
Yeah.
daredevils, like I said before, and it's just like, that's what kids wanna see, that's what the parents are coming to bring their kids to see. Mm, that was a common theme that we heard at every single protest was people who either did not know that there were going to be elephants and who were surprised to hear that, or even people who, we had there were actually a couple times that the campaigners told me that, someone stopped in their tracks. They took the information and they said, yes, they'd already bought a ticket, but they're not gonna go in and they're not gonna support it
Wow.
anymore. We had at least 2 instances where someone joined the protest,
Wow.
so that was, impactful, and then the other thing that we saw happen was people who are kind of like, on the fence about it. They'd say, "Oh, I support your cause, but, like, I bought the ticket already," and so they
Right.
go in and, we would have the protests would be going outside of each show, and sometimes there's 2 shows in a row. So we'd be there that whole time, and there'd be people who would come out after the show, and they'd come to our campaigners and our protesters and say, I think you're right about this."
It's
And
fantastic.
so they'd
That's
gone in, they'd
fantastic.
seen it for themselves, but they had a different perspective because of the fact that people were out there holding signs.
Right.
I mean, even just one person holding a sign can make a huge difference.
It's really
Yeah.
it's inspirational. It really
Well,
is.
and it like you said, it changes their perspective as they're going in because then they're thinking, "Oh, there's something wrong with these elephants being here," so they're maybe more aware of seeing the elephants are moving really slowly. If they seem injured, if they seem tired, like, then they're more sensitive to seeing those kinds of smaller issues because they've kind of been primed.
Exactly. And we had leaflets as well that we were handing out, both about circus cruelty in general, but also we had specific information about Viola. And I think that that really helps people to understand when they see them as individuals. Every animal
Absolutely.
is someone. That's like our tagline.
Right.
And getting that message across really makes it clear to people that, these are individual animals. They feel the same kind of things that humans do, including joy, but also including pain. And I think that the more people see that in other animals, the more they come to respect our fellow animals and what PETA stands for.
Logistically, how does it work when they move through states, some of which don't permit transport or exhibiting elephants and some that do? What happens to the elephants that are with, I guess, that tour when they get to states where they can't bring those elephants into the state?
Well, so for instance, in Washington state, the actual letter of the law is that elephants are not permitted to be used in traveling performances. So there's actually nothing that prohibits them from being stored in a trailer,
Right,
unfortunately.
right.
So that was something we actually looked for. We wanted to know whether they just stashed Viola and Isa in a trailer backstage, and we did not find them. And so our assumption is they did go back to Oklahoma. And the thing is, Jordan World has always had several dates in Washington. And so I do think that the Washington ban really threw a wrench into their tour plans. We've seen in the past where sometimes when they're not allowed into a jurisdiction, well, there's some other circus that's happening at the same time, and they take the elephants and use them for that, so they don't even get a break. We've seen other times where they just go to the next stop and they wait for the rest of the circus to catch up to them. So, really, it's unpredictable. We really cannot know what they might do. In this case, because I think they had so many Washington dates, and then they went to Montana, but then they went back to Washington. So they had this really long stretch of time where they were going to be touring through Washington, and I think that that was also probably something that pushed them toward at least taking them off the road temporarily, but then what became news to us was they just decided to do it for the rest of the year, and so they did drop Elephant Acts from their tour, and so that's the victory that we wanted to celebrate is that, they did confirm both the box office and also a venue sent us some information they had received from a circus manager or someone they called the circus manager who said they were not using elephants on this tour anymore. So we don't know what's going to happen next year. We really hope that this is, the final change and that we never see elephants on the road again, but we don't know. And if they do bring elephants back next year, you can better believe it. We will be out there every single time holding signs and we will be dragging them through the mud. And I think they know that. So I
Yes,
think they know
Yeah.
better.
yes,
Yeah, I mean, you would think that they would think twice about bringing them back next year, knowing that it's just gonna be the same thing that happened this year with protests, with people coming in and leaving halfway through the circus because they've been speaking to the protesters outside, and they don't feel very good about seeing the animals there.
Well, and
So
I think also they've probably seen that they still are able to sell tickets to people
right,
who don't even know the elephants are gonna be there or not. So, I
right.
think that that's another thing. When it comes down to it, it's all about their bottom line.
Absolutely.
Obviously, another factor very simply could have been that the cost of gas has increased,
mm,
and it's not cheap to
100%.
haul elephants around. So, I think that probably the biggest driving factor was PETA's protests, but it was no doubt, online campaigns from other groups as well that we know that there's other groups had been also arranging protests, and we know that they'd been putting ads on, social media, and so just the way that, our phones have GPS in them, and so there's a way to target ads for people in a certain location. So that's how sometimes when you open up your phone, you're like, "I've never even looked at this page. Why am I seeing this ad?"
right,
Well, because it senses your location and someone
yes,
has paid for you to see that ad, and so we know that that's been going on too, where people in the areas where the circuses are going had seen those online campaigns. There had been petitions. There's all of this, and PETA was the driving force behind a lot of it, but we do know that a lot of people have participated and helped in the cause. Plus the legislation that has passed and certainly like the entire state of Washington really
right,
put a big blow in their tour. Plus the increased costs in transportation, like just just the cost of gas. I think all of that combined was probably just not worth.
Perfect storm for
Yeah,
them.
yeah, it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
So and also knowing that, like, they were still being able to sell tickets. So, all of that, I think, does get at the point that they can still have a very entertaining circus that doesn't use elephants and hopefully eventually no animals whatsoever. Currently, they do still have dogs, they have a dog act, and they also have pony rides, and they also have a snake that they have photo ops about. So that's one reason why at the beginning of the year, we sort of look at the each circus tour and we determine what the landscape kind of looks like before we start any campaigns because we want to know who is where.
Yeah.
But yeah, for these larger tours, it usually does stay pretty consistent.
So with them not touring, how many circuses are touring with elephants right now this year?
So the Loomis Brothers Circus is the only other tour, like consistent tour that is using elephants. And we actually, so Loomis Brothers is notorious for changing their lineup throughout the year. So that one is really hard to predict. What will happen is if an elephant is being used at a show, we can usually expect that for the next few stretch of shows they will be used. But Loomis tends to take little breaks, so they kind of take like a spring break. And when they come back, we have to assess again whether who they're using because they use different animals throughout the year. So we don't know yet if that elephant is named Oka and she also is elderly and she's actually completely alone. She's been completely alone for a few years now. And but
And do
she's
they own her, or is she owned
she's
through a
leased.
different?
She's leased. So she's leased from a man named Brian Franzen out of Florida. And he most recently was using Oka at a shrine circus. And so again, we've been tracking this stuff for so long that we can kind of guess how things are going to play out, but we don't know for sure until it happens. And so people are going to be protesting Loomis Brothers. I'm sure they expect it. They know it. And then we'll be able to determine, like, is Oka being used for this next stretch of shows or not? And, if not, that doesn't change the fact that we're still going to be protesting their use of other animals because one thing that is consistent is Loomis Brothers uses animals
Mm.
and they usually use wild animals. So if they don't have elephants, they might have tigers or zebras. So there are going to be wild animals. That's almost certain. And of course, now that I said that, they'll
Yeah,
have dogs and horses probably, but
yeah.
that is almost a guarantee. And so, of course, the wild animal acts are the priority at this time. And so Loomis Brothers is one of the bigger offenders. But then besides them, it's really just shrine circuses that are produced independently. Every single one of them is separate from the other. So there's not a shrine circus tour. There's not one singular entity that does all shrine circuses. They are all produced separately. And sometimes they have the same producer. And so then the lineup might be the same. So let's say there is a shrine circus that's being produced by Jordan World Circus. Well, we can predict that whoever's on Jordan World's tour will be at that shrine circus. But we've also seen before where the shrine circus will go ahead and also lease animals from a different exhibitor. And so then the lineup is a little different from the main Jordan World tour. And then the same thing with Carden. Carden Circus produces a lot of shrine circuses as well. And so we see the same pattern. It's a pretty good idea of who will be there if it's produced by Carden, but it could change. But at this point, we can expect that Carson and Barnes will probably lease elephants out to one of the shrine circuses or more than that, or, a few throughout the rest of this year. And we would expect to see between 2 and maybe 5 elephants, possibly. But again, big question mark. And then Oka, who is probably going to be on Loomis Brothers tour, maybe used for some other shrine circuses, big question mark. Last year and the year before, Loomis Brothers used an elephant from a circus called Tarzan Zerbini Circus. They didn't this year. We don't know why. They decided to go with Franzen, and it really is just unpredictable. But since they had it, maybe they'll use Tarzan Zerbini again later in the year. But again, we're just kind of basing it on patterns, and so we think it's very likely that Oka will be back with Loomis Brothers, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah, it's such a confusing mess
Yeah.
when you have so many suppliers and so many, people who are leasing, and they are definitely trying to keep all of us on our toes, that's for sure.
Yeah, and again, I think that's another reason we're seeing a decrease in the use of wild animals because they're not making enough money from it
Right.
anymore.
Yeah. Danielle did some undercover work and was told tickets were like $10.
Yeah,
I
for the
can't
Jordan World Circus. Yeah, that's
how do they
crazy.
possibly survive?
So they sell the tickets. Well, they do I think they do like a deal on the first 100 tickets. They sell
Yeah,
them for $10. And then then they do jump up in price. But kids are usually they get in for free.
yeah,
So, they are giving away tickets. Where the exhibitors really get the money is from the rides. So,
Alright,
the
sure,
elephant rides that go on during intermission and before
sure.
and after the shows, they're selling those at $20 a pop. So, you put 6 people, well, let's just do easy math. They put 5 people on an elephant, that's $100 for them to walk around in 2 little circles, and that's it.
and I'm sure that they do that for at least an hour straight of just
Yes,
that elephant walking
they do it
circles.
for an hour before the show, they'll do it during the intermission, which is usually at least a half hour, and then they do it after the show as well. So, there's at least 2.5 hours where and again, the elephants are walking in 2 circles, and they're using 2. So, they constantly have a load of people on their back. And for elephants who are elderly and are already facing joint issues, who already have, issues with cracked toenails and just painful joints, loading them up with between 6 to 9 people, even if some of them are kids, so they obviously don't weigh as much as an adult, but still putting all that pressure on their back it just literally is backbreaking. And that's the thing that I think is also hard because people are like, "Oh, they're a massive elephant, they're 10,000 pounds." Well, but you're putting 10,000 pounds plus all of the human pounds onto these already very weak joints.
Plus
It's
these saddles, which are not
Yes.
lightweight,
Yeah,
and
exactly,
you're
all of that.
putting them directly on top of their spine,
Yes.
just directly sitting on the
And they're
spine,
usually
like
walking around on cement, although sometimes
yep,
it might be on packed dirt, but it's still, it's not good for their feet, it's not good for their joints.
yeah,
And PETA will put out some information from, like, an expert who's gone and looked and said their toenails are in really rough shape. And people might not understand how serious that is because, like, "Oh, it's just a nail." But literally imagine if you had a hangnail. Like, if you had a hangnail, which we all know that's really painful, but then pretend that you had to walk on that nail and put your entire body weight on that nail. That suddenly increases the pain that that thing has tenfold. So, a cracked nail, an overgrown nail, anything like that is so painful for these elephants, and they just power through it, and, they don't always show signs of pain. Sometimes we will actually see lameness, but again, because these are thousands of pounds of weight, when an elephant is lame, they're not limping like a dog might limp. When you see a dog limping, you think, "Oh, that dog's leg is hurt," because they can lift up their entire leg. An elephant, very, very rare to see them lift up an entire leg. So, when they're lame, they hold their leg real stiff or they otherwise, move it in an abnormal way. That's very clear that that leg is in pain, but to somebody that doesn't understand elephant behavior, that's very hard to notice, and that includes inspectors, honestly, federal inspectors of the USDA, especially, and then animal control inspectors as well. They don't know this about elephants, so it's really hard for them to recognize pain and suffering in elephants because they hide it so well, but that's one thing that we try to do is we try to get this education out there and tell people, the leading cause of death, I'm sure I don't have to tell you guys, leading cause of death in captive elephants are foot and joint problems.
yeah. I think that even so many people probably aren't aware that these circuses don't actually own the elephants, and that in the case of Jordan World, that their USDA license to exhibit animals was revoked. And I think that even just that is so powerful to hear that this exhibitor had their license revoked for animal cruelty, and they're still able to then lease animals from other exhibitors to bring.
Right.
And I mean, that is such a powerful statement that the
Yeah, it's a
USDA
loophole.
believed they should not have animals. And then
Right.
they're able, yes, like you said, to go through this loophole to bring them.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah,
just something that
it's
isn't
absolutely
common knowledge.
a loophole, and they don't have to be held accountable. You know, Viola escaped in Butte, Montana. She ran through the streets, and guess what? That was a violation of the Animal Welfare Act, and Carson and Barnes was cited for it, adding to their nearly 150 citations. Jordan World not held accountable. Yes, their names attached to it. They get some bad headlines, but they're not going to be facing any sort of consequences from the federal government, which Carson and Barnes could. That we haven't seen them do any significant enforcement action based on that citation thus far, but the wheels of government turn exceptionally slowly. It's very possible there still could be something. The citation is the base level. So that's just essentially a noncompliance. You did not comply with the Animal Welfare Act. But that's, just the bottom level. Then if you start getting a lot of citations, you might get an official warning. And then or you could get a citation and penalty. So you actually have to pay a fine. And then if you have a lot of violations, especially, in close succession to one another, the government might decide that they need to take you to court over it. And they did that to Carson and Barnes, and they took them to court. They alleged several animal welfare violations, including for when Viola escaped two separate times, once in 2010 and once in 2014. And Carson and Barnes decided to go ahead and just settle that case. So they paid $16,000, and therefore they were not found to have violated the Animal Welfare Act because they essentially paid a fine to wipe the slate clean. That's unfortunately how these cases play
That's
out. So now
terrible.
Carson Barnes can say, "Oh, well, look, we didn't violate because you paid
That's
because you paid a
terrible.
fine to avoid getting this charge, essentially." I mean,
Also,
it's
that's
civil
not
loss.
even a that's not even a very big fine. $16,000? That should be way higher.
Absolutely, should have been way higher. They were cut a huge break, and, same thing happened with Ringling. Ringling had, at the time, I believe it was the highest penalty that had ever been assessed of an exhibitor, and it was $270,000. Ringling paid it, and then they could say that they hadn't violated the Animal Welfare Act.
That's crazy that
Yeah.
that's
I
the
mean, it's
result.
essentially it's essentially similar. Basically, it's maybe an equivalent in criminal law, and forgive me because 'cause I'm not a lawyer, but it would be kind of like saying no contest. I'm not saying I'm guilty, I'm not saying I'm innocent. I'll just pay a fine to get rid of this, and so then they don't have a guilty charge on their record. That's kind of
Yes.
similar to what this is about. They're definitely did something, because 'cause they're
Yeah.
paying a fine, and they recognize that they need to own up to it, and so there's a bit of accountability, but there's now nothing on the record that says they violated the Animal Welfare Act because those alleged violations were wiped clean with the settlement.
Yeah. And it's really crazy that for someone like Jordan World, in having their USDA license revoked and then leasing elephants, in some ways that's way easier for them because of the lack of accountability. So
For
for
sure. I
them,
mean, I
that
have a
probably
feeling
didn't
it's
impact them that much having that license revoked.
no, I don't think it impacted their ability to use animals at all. If I mean, it might be more expensive
Yeah.
to set up those lease agreements, but we've seen their use of animals decrease over the years. 10 years ago, they had bears, they had tigers, they had llamas, they had goats even. They even had domestic cats. They basically every animal under the sun that was, acts that they were able to book. And now, because they don't have the elephants and they don't have the last year they had camels, they don't have the camels anymore. Um, and it's just dogs. And hopefully we even see the dogs, go away as well.
It's all truly mind-blowing that this is happening in the US and that we are so far behind when it comes to outlawing things like traveling animal acts. It's not surprising to me at all that so many people who go to the circus are surprised to hear that there would be animals there, because you think that that's something that should have been outlawed decades ago, and we're just so far behind on this.
And the fact that we've seen, a dozen states now have some sort of ban or restriction on traveling acts, whether that's an actual circus ban, or some of them just have a bullhook ban, which in effect does prohibit
Yeah.
elephants in traveling acts. That's the intent, at least, behind it. We have not always seen we've seen some loopholes there, but that's the intent behind it. And then also there's some states that just prohibited elephant acts. And so there's just, every state has been different. It's kind of piecemeal together, but there are a dozen states where there's a challenge, if not an absolute prohibition, for circuses to bring elephants into the state to perform. And I expect that number will grow. And eventually there may even be a federal measure that goes forward. We saw the Big Cat Public Safety Act get passed at the federal level. That was a pretty big deal. And
Huge.
it made a big impact to a lot of roadside zoos that were doing tiger cub petting. So it's not outside the realm of possibility. I think that we, in our culture now, in our society, it is possible. We just have to have the right timing and the right pressure to make something like that happen.
When was that banned, the big cat? When was that?
Is that 2021?
It was signed into law in 2022.
2022.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you said, even with the protests, the public pressure makes such a huge difference. Whether it's targeted ads, whether it's in person protests, that public pressure makes a difference. And the more that PETA and other organizations and even individuals can lean into that and say, I'm passionate about this, great. Next time the circus is coming into town, I'll join the PETA protest. That makes such a huge difference. There is really strength in numbers in that pressure, putting pressure on these circuses to make a
Yeah, and
difference.
I think getting media attention, whether that's traditional media or even social media, because obviously social media influencers,
Yeah.
it's a growing and literal influence over people.
Yeah.
So the more that that's getting attention too, which sometimes, yeah, a flashy protest draws attention
Yeah.
to the media, and they're interested in what why are you here today, and that kind of thing. And so
Right.
just getting that word out, people will get the message. And then behind the scenes, we're working on these things. Like, there's some groups that really focus on legislation. PETA's primary focus with regard to legal strategies is like there are laws that actually already exist. They're already on the books. They're just not getting enforced. And
Yeah.
so my department's job is essentially to provide all this evidence to the agencies and say, here is why this is a violation. And you have the authority to enforce the law. And that is effective. A lot of these agencies, they have so much going on. They don't always have the capacity or the resources to investigate these cases to the extent that we've been able to put the evidence together for them. So even the USDA, honestly, they have less than 100 inspectors for, 8,000 licensees.
Yeah. Things slip through the cracks so easily.
Yeah, so when we even just submit a USDA complaint and provide this evidence, then they can go and say, "Yep, this looks like it violated the law," issue a citation, and then, that adds to the list and potentially puts them in the running for
Yeah.
more of an enforcement action.
Yeah. So now with this news from Jordan World that they are not using elephants for the rest of 2026, what is PETA pushing for as a next step? What's your guys' kind of next move with this?
Well, we'll definitely keep an eye on Jordan World Circus and make sure that they don't bring elephants back this tour or in the future. And obviously, if they do, we will have to really push hard against that. I'm trying to be optimistic. I have a really good feeling that they're not going to, but we will absolutely be outside every circus again if they do bring the elephants back. And then in terms of like Viola and the 16 other elephants who are being held at the Endangered Ark Foundation, PETA does have a campaign where we have, and people can go take action on our website to ask the Endangered Ark Foundation to please, let the elephants retire at a reputable sanctuary. At the very least, the absolute bare minimum that they could do would be to stop using bullhooks, to stop chaining them, to stop using them in public encounters. If they did that, and they allowed the elephants to live in the naturalistic paddocks that they do have, And I'm not going to deny that's a fact. They do have these spaces that they could potentially give these animals a chance to live in peace. But instead, what they're doing is at night, they're chaining them up in a barn. They bring them out to these enclosures that are not secure enough to leave the elephants unattended. So they have to stand there with a bullhook while people go and pet them and feed them. That is exploitation and abuse. And so if they could at least stop that, then, that's something that I think PETA would back up its campaign. Obviously, ideally, we want them to go to an accredited sanctuary, but at the very, very least, if they can stop doing those cruel things, that's what people can put pressure on them.
Right.
If they get
Yeah.
bombarded by emails, they might want the emails to stop.
Yeah. Do you think that reform like that is possible in some of these facilities? Do you think that they would be willing?
I mean, anything is possible, right? So
Yeah.
I do think that, and I have to be optimistic about it.
Yeah.
I do think that they have seen some of the writing on the wall. They've already established that they're no longer breeding elephants, which they used to do, and they used to have some young elephants in the circus. But I think again, like these other exhibitors, I think they see that this is a dying industry, and I hope that in our lifetimes we do see the end of it. I hope that next year is the year that there are no elephants on the road anymore. And then the next thing will be to get these public encounter operations to stop doing this. And it's absolutely possible. They have the potential if new ownership comes in and can really make a big change. I think that it would be the best possible solution.
Where are the paddocks that you're referencing? Where are they? I don't know anything about them.
So it's in Hugo, Oklahoma. And they have a few different barns where they have the elephants, and then there's some outdoor paddocks that aren't secure enough to leave the elephants in there all the time.
Uh,
They could absolutely be retrofitted. It could absolutely be, again, if different ownership came in, different philosophies about elephant care, it could be an elephant sanctuary. Right now, it's absolutely not.
and what would its capacity be?
That I don't know because they probably have more acreage than they've even enclosed at this point.
Right.
So I'm sure that they would have capacity. Again, I do think it would have to be a complete overhaul in management. So the Carson and Burns owners would have to relinquish their stake in the operation. But I think that if the elephants could stay there because sanctuary space is so limited, that actually would be a good solution if it could
Absolutely.
happen the way that I've outlined.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the way that they continue to use them right now, the best solution would be for them to leave and go
Yeah.
to an actual sanctuary.
Yeah.
But again, sanctuary space is really limited, and
Very
elephants
limited.
elephants are, they require a lot of space and they require very specialized care.
Yeah.
And there's a long line. There's a long
Yeah.
line of elephants waiting to get to a sanctuary.
Yes.
There are so many that need it that if some of these facilities could be reformed and, like you said, management could change and they could use some of the space that is existing there,
Yeah.
there's so much potential to have additional facilities that are reputable to move some of these elephants to and hopefully then take some of the zoo elephants as well and,
Yeah.
get through
Well,
that list.
even the facility that used to be the breeding ground for Ringling's elephants, it was called the Center for Elephant Conservation, quote unquote
Mhm.
conservation.
Yeah.
They were just breeding elephants. And they managed them with bullhooks like all the circuses do. Well, that was again after Ringling closed and ended their use of elephants. That center was transferred to a different management and ownership. It's now called White Oak, and they don't use bullhooks because they are AZA accredited. So they've gotten accreditation from the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Now, that doesn't mean that the breeding has ended. Unfortunately, they still are, doing some breeding, but they're not taking elephants out on the road. They're not using them for public encounters because that's
Right.
not allowed at
Right.
accredited zoos. So it's definitely possible for
Yeah.
places to make a change.
Right. It's not, a GFAS sanctuary, but it is better.
It's
And it's a sliding scale. How can we make the existing places as good as possible?
yeah,
And then the places that are truly a lost cause, how can we get the elephants out of them?
absolutely, and especially the places that don't have the infrastructure to make a change like that.
Yeah,
Um, then that's
don't have the
where
space, yeah.
yeah, they don't have the space, they don't have obviously, a lot of changes would have to be made at Carson& and Burns's home site in order for this to come, to fruition in the way that we'd like to see it. But if they're open to it, let's have that conversation.
Yeah,
Let's make it happen because that's what these elephants deserve. They deserve a true retirement, and the thing that's kind of really frustrating to see some of the headlines and even some of the circuses. There's been shrine circuses who have, gone and said, "We're not using elephants anymore." They've been retired. No, they're not retired. They're using them for exploitative encounters. That's not a
yeah,
retirement.
They're walking in
yeah.
circles with people on their backs.
Yeah, so it's
Or
just
they're
like
doing posed photos
yeah,
and yeah, I mean, the language being thrown around is so misleading to say, "Oh, they've been retired to our conservation center."
yeah. Well, and PETA also, we just not very long ago released a video from the Endangered Ark Foundation that was taken during an open house, which, again, anybody could come in. And they had these, I think they were selling them for $25, and a bathing encounter, or which was literally just grabbing a soapy scrub brush and then scrubbing the back end of the elephant for like a few minutes. And they had a long line of people because this open house was pretty crowded. Unfortunately, a lot of people did come to this thing. And they had these, bathing encounter, and one of the elephants named Tracy, who used to be on the road. She used to be a touring elephant, and now she's, part of the Endangered Arks herd. That's what they call that. But she was needing to relieve herself, and elephants have to stand up in order to do that. And so she was trying to stand up. They'd been made her lie down in order to allow the public to come and scrub her. And she kept trying to get up because she needed to relieve herself, and they were not letting her do it. And so she eventually just released her bowels, and then she was lying in her own filth, and they just made her do it because they wanted to use her for this bathing encounter. Eventually, they did actually clean it up a little bit, but then basically you could see the sequence of events in this video that we released. Even though eventually they did get her to lie down again, she was already in the process of lying down. I believe she maybe had already fully lied down, and the trainer went and just hooked her behind her ear with so much force because he essentially was telling her, in their way, "You didn't obey me, and now I'm punishing you." She lied down, she did what he wanted, but it's like it's like an abusive person who punishes someone even after they've already done what they were being asked to do, but were, maybe a little obstinate about it. So we're actually calling for criminal charges against Carson and Burns and against that trainer for the way that he treated Tracy in that moment because it's cruelty.
Absolutely. And it's amazing that so many people can go to a facility like that and, it just speaks to the lack of education that these quote unquote conservation centers provide, that people are not really seeing what's truly happening and they're not really understanding what's really happening. And so having you guys releasing that video and giving more context around it is so valuable for people to say, okay, maybe I was there, maybe I saw this, and I had no idea the context of why this elephant's trying to stand up or what's actually
Well,
happening in this sequence of events.
what's almost a little frightening, more frightening than that even, is that there were comments from the audience, and it's in the video where they say, "Oh, that's why she was trying to stand up." Like, they see her release her bowels, and they
Yeah.
understand it, and they're like, "Oh," and then some person even says, "I wouldn't wanna lie down either." So, like, they actually can see it happen in front of them, and they can even recognize that that's why she was trying to stand up. That's why she doesn't wanna lie back down, but there's no comments about the jabbing with the bull hook. There's no comments
Yeah.
about that abuse. They seem to recognize that, "Oh, I understand now why she didn't wanna lie down." But there aren't any comments about the actual abuse that's happening right in front of them, and they still have the scrub brush in their hand, and they're gonna walk in and do the encounter. So it's like where I don't understand exactly where that disconnect happens and how people could watch that and not get up and walk away. Like, to me, that's where it's hard to understand why this hasn't gotten through to people, but we will continue to try, and we will continue to, push and put the pressure on and educate, because there is a disconnect, and we wanna make sure that people make the connection.
Yeah. I think so much of it comes from people being so wrapped up in their own experience that they want to have, that
Yeah.
they're not considering the animal, they're not considering the external factors because they're thinking, "I want to scrub this elephant. I want to touch this
Yeah.
elephant. I want a video or a photo of me doing this so I can share it on social media. I want this." And they're so wrapped up in their personal experience that they're not putting themselves in the position of the elephant's experience.
Well, and one of the so as soon as Tracy did stand up, when because they eventually did clean up the ground, and she stood up for them to do that, and they did let her stand up. And when she did that, she started immediately swaying, which we know is a sign of distress. And someone in the audience said that weaving like that, "I've seen horses do that. Yeah, that's a sign of mistreatment." Someone in this audience said that on the video. It's on this video that we've received,
Yeah.
and it's like, how is it that they even recognize the distress right in front of them, and they're still not taking a stance? They're still not walking away from it. They're still just like, "Oh, maybe they're being mistreated at this exact moment, but I wanna hold feed them," Like, I
Yeah.
don't know. It's it's baffling, but we've made a lot of progress, and we will be able to educate those people as well. I know it. I'm confident.
These facilities are going to need to clean up their act because people are catching on.
People are catching on, and I think, this kinda gets back to, Viola's escape, and the fact that that did get a lot of media attention. A lot of people are drawn to that kinda news because not only is it the animals suffering, but, well, that puts me in danger, that puts my family in danger.
Yeah.
And so there is a little bit of how it might affect me and the human element. And we see that kind of thing happen when there's incidents in Thailand, or even there was one in India that just happened. I just saw
Yeah.
Yesterday, yeah.
A couple days
where
ago.
a woman was crushed
Yeah.
Yeah.
under an elephant during a bathing encounter. And when stuff like that happens and that goes viral, people will clue in to the fact that that's dangerous for me to do. And also, maybe the reason that elephant, you know, snapped was because they've been chained up, and they've been forced to do this, and they finally, reacted. Because obviously these are wild animals. It's absolutely within their nature to assert aggression when they are scared, when they are stressed, when they are responding to a stressor. That's all it is. And the more that people understand that, I think they can realize, okay, this is not good for the animals. It's not good for for humans either.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so spot on with the human risk as well. I think once people see that something is dangerous for them and their families, they think twice about it because at the end of the day, we are selfish creatures.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's the other side of the coin. It's I see this happening in front of me, but I really want to take that photo with an
Yep.
elephant.
Yeah.
But then if
What's
that elephant grabs you with their trunk,
Yeah.
Well,
um,
what's amazing is that incident, that horror show in India, now they're gonna take measures so that this doesn't happen.
yeah.
You couldn't anticipate that one day this was gonna happen, and now you're gonna take measures? Great that you're taking measures, but what are these
But
people
it
thinking?
had to
It
take
it
a
took
woman
somebody
and an
dying,
elephant dying.
dying.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the case in the US too. I feel like
Yeah.
when the USDA oftentimes will cite for an incident in which a person is injured for instance, they will not issue citation until it happens, until the injury happens because of, a lack of barriers. We do occasionally sometimes see them cite for something preemptively, like, "Okay, you don't have enough barriers here to protect the animals or the humans, so you need to have better barriers. That's part of the Animal Welfare Act." But most of the time, it's like the conditions will be that way for years. The USDA inspector will go in and never say anything about it until someone gets bitten or until someone gets,
Killed.
killed even. Yeah, then suddenly this isn't safe. It wasn't ever safe.
Well, that's the joke of it, that
Yeah.
anybody could watch that and participate in that and think this is a good idea, or even a neutral a neutral idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really it's hard to
Yeah. The narrative of them being such gentle giants and liking humans, thinking humans are cute, and, all these narratives we put on elephants that are shared on social media to make them seem like the puppy dogs of the wild animal world. They're dangerous. They are huge and they are dangerous.
that underscores what has to happen to an elephant,
Yeah.
what they have to experience to get to that point where somebody can wrap their hands around the trunk at a so-called
Right.
sanctuary.
They break their spirits. I mean, we
They
say that,
ruin them.
we use that language, but it's not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
No, no,
They essentially try to break the wild animal out of
they
them.
crush
I
them.
mean,
They
honestly,
crush.
even when people ride horses, it's called breaking a horse
Yeah.
Right.
because you don't wanna be bucked off the horse, so you have to break the horse. That's what's going on with elephants too, but it's even to a higher degree because they are wild animals and they haven't lived for tens of thousands of years domesticated alongside humans like horses have. So it's just like it's exponential the amount of abuse that has to go into getting those elephants to quote unquote behave more
Yeah.
tamely. But guess what? They still have those instincts and they still are wild animals. And at some point,
They're gonna snap.
it's almost a guarantee that they will suddenly be like, "Today is the day I am no longer putting up with this."
Yeah.
And for Viola, she's experienced that at least 4 times where she says, "I'm out of here." And she tries her hardest to get away. And unfortunately, they've not she's been recaptured and she just has to live her life the last 50 years chained and performing for the circus, but she still tries. It's still there. She still has that internal desire to be free, and so that's what we wanna do for Viola. We wanna help her be free.
What's sad is that says she knows there's something else.
Yeah,
There are animals that live in their existence, and that's their existence.
that's their they live in peace. And to be clear, we all know that Viola can never go back to
Of course,
the wild, so
of
she never
course,
will be truly free. But
but
as
she
free as she
knows.
can be, which is that she's just left alone to do her own and to get to
Yeah.
be an elephant, that's what we want for her, and she can get that in an accredited sanctuary, so we will continue to push for her and for the other elephants who are confined at the Endangered Ark Foundation.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing what your campaign has accomplished and even just the progress of seeing Jordan World stop their elephant acts for 2026 is such a huge win for all of us to celebrate. So thank you so much for the work that you and your
Yeah,
team and all of the teams within PETA have done to
yeah,
get to this point. It's really amazing.
we like to build off these wins, so
Yeah,
there's momentum. So we have this win, what's next? We don't
right.
slow down. We'll keep pushing Carson and Barnes to release the elephants to a true sanctuary, and then we will be looking at the other remaining circuses. There's really only literally like a handful of
Yeah,
elephants who are still on the road now, and that that's why I don't know. I'm like maybe next year's the last year,
yeah.
maybe even this year's the last year. I don't know.
The end is in sight,
The
though.
end is in sight, absolutely.
Grateful. We're grateful, grateful,
Yeah,
grateful
And
for the
I
work
just
that you're
hope
doing.
that the end isn't brought about because the elephants actually just die on the road. I hope that we're able to let them see a happy ending and live the rest of their golden years in a true sanctuary. That's obviously the goal, and we will keep working toward that goal.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending so much time with us on this. We were so excited to see the news, and it's answered so many questions chatting with you, and I'm sure it's answered a lot of people's questions. So
Good. I'm
it
glad.
is greatly appreciated, and we
And
can't wait to keep following along with PETA's campaigns and see what you guys accomplish next.
yeah, and of course, go to PETA.org, sign up for our email alerts
Yeah,
and e-news, and stay updated that way. Anytime there's big news like this, we'll definitely be posting about it. So if people want to sign up for our e-news and action alerts, that's definitely one way to stay in the loop. And obviously, even if you just have questions about stuff, we have so many people who are experts in all these different divisions, and we're happy to provide answers. So there's, email form at PETA.org. If you have questions, reach out and we're happy to respond.
amazing.
And
We'll
we'll have
link
you
that.
back when you accomplish all the other things you're going to accomplish. We'll have you back
I hope. Yes,
to hear
I
Yeah,
will
to hear all about them.
definitely. I
yeah.
look forward to it.
And we will have links to all of that in the show notes as well as to PETA's Instagram because that is also a great place to see updates on campaigns and see what's going on. So we'll have all of that linked in the show notes for people. But
Great.
thank you so much again. We really,
Yeah,
really
of
appreciate
course.
it.
I'm glad we had the chance to talk.
Yeah,
Yes,
us too.
we are too.